So, welcome everyone. Hello and welcome to the first episode of Undisciplined. I'm here at Willem de Kooning with Eric, and we are in a very nice room with very nice fabric, and there are some cookies, some water. So it is a very nice environment. We are here representing RASL, which is Rotterdam Art and Science Lab. And we are also so lucky to have here the team, the work behind and within and around us, which is Mirte, Ben, Noemi, Monse, and Niels. And they also made everything together. So basically, what we're here because we want to be here. We like what we're doing, first of all, and me and Eric, we started to kind of understanding and try to ask ourselves how we can combine and use different knowledge. And we both studying in cultural economics and entrepreneurship at Erasmus, but nevertheless we're always been very interested into trying to combine different knowledge and try to understand what does it really mean using all these wonderful disciplines that we are hearing all the time at Erasmus or in the other educational institution here in Rotterdam. We are going live on YouTube, so if you guys also have some comments, some remarks, there is Mirte that is actually taking care of it. So if you just drop us a line if something doesn't work or if you want to stress something else.
So I'm gonna just briefly set a little bit the stage of this event, what we're talking about as before we move on to our guests. So I think it's good to talk about two main concepts. As I think Marco already mentioned, one of them is transdisciplinarity. So this is really at the core of what RASL is, right? So RASL tries to combine arts and science. And not just have one artist and one scientist, but also together create knowledge that actually transcends those disciplines. We found a nice definition by UNESCO, which reads, so the definition of transdisciplinarity would be an intellectual space where the nature of the manifold links among isolated issues can be explored and unveiled. It is the space where issues are rethought, alternatives reconsidered, and interrelations revealed. So I think one of the things that we like about this specific definition is the fact that it's an actual space, right? So they talk about interdisciplinarity as a space, which is also what we try to create here. Even in a pandemic, we, I think, managed very safely to create a space with 5 guests around a very big table, but still as gezellig or comfortable, as cozy as possible. And then the space where issues are rethought. So it's about, we all are constantly already living in these structures we're already so much thinking all the time, and we want to try to create a space where we can take some of those connections that are already in our brain and see if we can remake those connections somehow. We'll get to that later. So we want to do that in our event, but we also, to give a little hint already, we also see that in the guests that we have here around the table, that they are open and able to also do this a little bit. So to also break out of their personal disciplines and ready to make those connections to these other worlds.
And maybe to fight, which is fun. Like politely, but it's,
We have enough distance, so I think it's safe. So that's transdisciplinarity, well, not really, but in a nutshell, I think as much as we all need to know. So the other thing is the SDGs, right?
Yeah.
So they are Sustainable Development Goals by the UN. There are 17 of them. Don't worry, I'm not going to name all 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
But check them out.
You can look them up,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They were adopted by all the United Nations members in 2015, and they call it a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all by 2030. So we still have 10 years. I don't know if that's worrying or alarming, but
8.5.
Oh, yes, that's very true. So they're about poverty, they're about clean water, they're about reducing inequality, and number 8 is actually about decent work and economic growth, and that's going to be our starting point for today. However, all these 70 goals are, of course, interlinked, and also to the point, the bridge actually from transdisciplinarity is that all these goals are too complex to really talk about even to solve at least from a single discipline. So transdisciplinarity, we see it as like the perfect strategy to at least talk about these SDGs. So then moving on, we wanted to kind of kickstart the event later with a research question, which is where do we start to rethink work to become more sustainable and inclusive? So this is quite a large research question.
Yeah. And this is actually why we asked to a student and also a very creative person to help us put us into a mindset or into a sort of a vibe. So this is the reason why now we're going to introduce Ben's work. Benedict. I'm just going to read a bit about Ben. So Ben hates borders, especially between disciplines. He's a RASO student, and which means that he's studying at Willem de Kooning at the Erasmus University College. He thinks that art, science, and entrepreneurship are different, but they should talk about the same thing if they want to work towards the same goal. So now we can actually hear the piece of Ben. It's going to be around 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Ben, and I like bullshit. That's also why this event is cool. Because arts and sciences and entrepreneurship all work with bullshit, if they notice or not. I think there's actually no way around it if you want to start somewhere. So when we ask, where do we start? I think bullshit is an answer. What is it anyways? Bullshit. There's this traveler in Thomas More's Utopia, Johnny Bullshit. They're sitting in this cafe and chilling, and then this guy comes in, Johnny Bullshit, and starts talking about this magic island where life is easy and everything. A bit like the SDGs. Sustainable economic growth, sustained and inclusive and full and productive and everything. That's bullshit, they think. And we all know in a way what they mean, don't we? Bullshit is nonsense. Something that doesn't fit anywhere. Wherever we try to put it, it just causes contradictions wherever it appears. A little piece of information just floating around there in space, with no direction, no purpose, except of being annoying. And that's what makes it so valuable. It is out there, just waiting for somebody to team up with, to interact and create the weirdest perspectives. That's bullshit, they think. And they're right. Maybe just not in the way they think. it is bullshit. And that's exactly what makes it so valuable. It's exactly why we should appreciate it. Because there's so much we can do with it. There's nothing we couldn't do with it, and without it we couldn't do anything. It is bullshit, and we just have to treat it as such. We should play with it, build with it, throw it all together on huge piles. Piles of bullshit. Compost piles. Yeah, in that sense, it is more an attitude. It's not that much about what we do with it, but about how we deal with it. But the question was, where do we start? A big question. Huge, like a gigantic ice cube. We heard it so many times, and every time we try to touch it or to talk about it, our tongue freezes and sticks to it like unable to talk about it or draw any direction where to go. But when dealing with gigantic ice cubes, bullshit comes in surprisingly handy. Just right because it doesn't make sense, but because it causes so much contradiction, so much possibility, that it melts the ice cube or breaks it apart and creates a space. Space to breathe. And space to play. And we need these spaces, utopian spaces, that hold the capacity to deal with a multiplicity of contradicting belief systems, all at the same time. We need magical spaces, magic islands like the one Johnny Bullshit was talking about, magic islands with huge compost piles. Compost piles with no other purpose than giving space to breathe. Space for all pieces of bullshit to touch another, to compose and decompose, without pressing delete on any of them. Magical islands with a compost politics, and businesses of bullshit in a compost economy. If we want to start, we need to start on these islands, where the collective imagination oscillates between contradicting parallel perspectives in a constant process of... fuck. That's bullshit. Hey.
Battery 100%.
Great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Can we applaud? I mean, it was great. Thank you, Ben. That was great. We're not here alone, which is already wonderful in these days. We are here with 3 guests. So I'm going to start with you because you are the closest one to me.
Yes.
If you could introduce yourself and your pronouns.
So my pronouns are she and her, and I am Deborah Allen Rogers from New York City and The Hague. I work in peace building. I work in education with Brainworks Academy with Kevin Durandamy, who is based in Rotterdam as well. And I have an NGO called Find Out Why, based in The Hague. And we are a digital fluency lab. So yes, that's me, and I'm really happy to be here.
Nice. The same for you? If you, the same questions.
My name is Dr. Ginie Servant-Miklos. I'm originally French, but cosmopolitan in spirit. And I'm a senior lecturer in the Humanities Department at Erasmus University College. I'm also very happy to be here today because I'm now part of the Razzle Bachelor Design team, so that'll be a fun project to get my teeth into. I do a lot of public intellectual work. I write a lot, I publish a lot on questions of education, sustainability, progressive and disruptive pedagogy, critical pedagogy. And I also am the founder and chair of the board of a women's empowerment charity that has projects in India and Zimbabwe, and that focuses on channeling the power of martial arts to empower girls from underprivileged backgrounds.
Which is called?
And it's called Fair Fight.
Yes.
And that's not the Fair Fight of Stacey Abrams. We had the name first, I'd like to point out. And my pronouns are she and her.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hey there.
Hi.
I am Merlijn Twaalfhoven, he, him. And I studied composition. I always wanted to be a musician, and a composer, but I created a lot of projects that were a bit out of the, let's say, the infrastructure of concert halls and settings. So always seeking, boundaries or limits to cross, but especially people to connect, different worlds, different cultures, different mindsets. And since a few years I started the Turn Club in the Netherlands, which is kind of a movement of now a few hundred artists and change makers, people who will use their artist mindset to really help transform our society towards, sustainable, more fair, you name it. This is now my main question. How can we build actually different pathways between the artistic, world of imagination and beauty and play, and the urgent issues of today, like the SDGs.
Yeah. Do you guys have something to say about Ben's work? Like to kind of break it a bit? It doesn't have to be that structured. We can,
It's so funny because Ben was one of my students in the last quad and I didn't know this side of him. So it's kind of interesting. Ben always had very critical questions in the lectures. It was, of course, the climate crisis. Yeah. And Irene sent me your final assignment to look at, and now suddenly it all makes sense. Thanks for the imagination, Ben.
It's going to help your grade, I think. It's amazing.
I would add that also I had need to add that I'm part of the Creative Revolution that Kevin Durandamy is starting as an official.com. And when I think about On Bullshit, the book On Bullshit, which you probably know well, Ben, perhaps you've heard of it, but I think you might have. I think of the word bullshit in the sense of there's this cynical contrasting perspective as well, that is lies, bullshit as lies. And I think that the playful attitude that you brought to that is very interesting. And I think it'll be interesting for our discussion to talk about the role of lies in jumping across the different networks. And the idea of there is not necessarily a problem with trust, there's a problem with betrayal. And I see that grounded in bullshit. So, yeah.
Well, yeah. I love the part of the melting and creating space. Yeah. And in many cases, bullshit can fill spaces. Yeah. So can it also create spaces? That's an interesting question. Because the space that is not already occupied is very important. We need free space or the common ground or commons. This type of spaces are very necessary. So that's what I heard of.
Nice. I think maybe to reiterate perhaps, but also to just so that we're all on the same page at this table, but also for the listeners. I'll give like a brief layout of the rest of this hour. Now that we've kind of, I don't know if the ice cube is already melted or our tongues are still stuck to it. Nevertheless, we're just going to start. Indeed, the research question that we already posed, which is where do we start to rethink work to become more sustainable and inclusive? We actually asked our guests to think about that question already, and we would like to also start with their perspective on this question. Very brief. We know indeed this question is not an answer, doesn't have an answer of 1 minute or 1 hour or 1 day. I mean, we are not here to solve the problem today. We are here to see how we can, if we can create a kind of knowledge or at least a setting in which we can all we can build something together. So again, that is transdisciplinary, right? So that's not academic, or it's not just an art piece, but it's something new.
Something in between.
Yeah. Something juicy. I don't know. Anyway, going back to the point. We asked everyone to answer this question in around 1 minute. So from their perspective, right?
Yeah.
So we will not be like, well, you didn't mention this in your answer, so it's incomplete. Of course not. Let's see if we can create this space of the space that transdisciplinarity is all about.
You want to start,
Right.
Deborah?
Sure, I'll start.
Wait.
When I
1 second.
1 sec. We have to technical things. So again, we are answering the question: where do we start to rethink work to become more sustainable and inclusive?
Okay. When I wrote the question down, when Marco and Eric first told me the question, I saw it as poetry. I saw it as spoken word. Where do we start? Next is to rethink. Next is work. Next is to become more sustainable. In the end, to become more inclusive. And so I grounded it in this answer, which I would submit. We start with the facts. We ground them in reality. We envision the improvements that become very evident in the contrasts. Then we build, which means rebuild, redesign the systems and structures that 2020 gave us great clarity on as being broken. We knew that before, but it became irrefutable. And then we align the improvements to manifest the better outcomes. And then the piece that is often missing, which I think is something that's really important for us at both the Creative Revolution and Find Out Why, is we celebrate the change. Because oftentimes we forget to celebrate even small improvements. And I'm going to throw this over to both of the other guests. And I think of the fair fight, and I think of the work that you're doing on that. And I know that you say, Ginie, that you failed at changing the world, but I think you actually didn't, because each of those girls I thought about are a world in and of themselves. And I think the world changed you, and that is the beautiful connection of both, you know, as I listen to you speak. And for Merlijn, when I thought of your work on Carried Away, and I thought of crossing over those borders, you know, the idea of Ben saying he doesn't love borders, and the fact that music throughout time has always crossed through the air. You know, if it's polluted or not, the music gets through. And so for me, that's how we start to rethink work, to become more sustainable and more inclusive.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
I don't know, I'm applauding again, but okay, sorry, I was taking notes. I'm the guy that is taking notes. It's
Yeah, right. Let's hand the mic to Ginie.
Well, as I've been invited here as the outspoken academic, please allow me to make an academic pitch to you. I'd like to start by proposing that in order to make work more sustainable, we need to decommodify it. That is, work for the last 3 centuries has been a disembodied commodity that is bought and sold on the market. And that system, which we call capitalism, is inherently unsustainable and inherently exclusive, because it sells and buys the labor of women and people of color at a lower price than that of white men, and that is structurally designed. For the longest time, of course, capitalism didn't want to pay for the labor of people of color at all. These inherent racism and sexism are still present in capitalism as we know it today, which still largely requires people who are unskilled to sell their bodies alienated from their mind, and people who are so-called skilled to sell their mind alienated from their bodies. And so we don't have the two coming together. And what we get is alienation on a planetary scale. None of this is sustainable. It is the myth that we have to work to live. And live by what? Live by more commodities that are in themselves not sustainable. And so if you want to rethink work, then you need to rethink the definition of work, not as a commodity bought and sold, but as an essential part of what we do as human beings with each other, together and for ourselves. And for that, we need to accept that the growth, economic growth, and the growth of commodities has to stop. You cannot have infinite economic growth on a finite planet. And for that, we must at the very least, start with a universal basic income that is based on a tax for the rich, because power and capital are concentrated in fewer and fewer hands of mostly rich white men. And furthermore, we have to eventually exit capitalism before it exits us from the planet, and move towards systems that are closer to decentralized socialism or anarcho-syndicalism or other forms of political economic systems that open up the space for possibilities and freedoms that are not currently granted to a large portion of the people on this planet.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Great. Now to you, Merlijn.
Yeah. Well, rethinking work, I first think that we can let go of the notion that work is based on scarcity, that we have to build, to make, to explore, or to exploit, and instead see if we can embrace abundance as a founding principle. And abundance can really lead us to repair, to care, to celebrate, indeed, and to find purpose as a central thing, and meaning, and just to see what's needed for it, instead of building for making and building's sake. So it's the abundance mindset that I think it's a challenge for us, because we are indeed really programmed to see scarcity everywhere. That's how we are indoctrinated. But if we can see it, there is abundance.
Nice.
Nice. Wow, wait a minute. Like I felt that I need to take a break. But we're not going to take a break. I just took some notes, and I kind of connect alienation from Ginie to lies of Deborah and no scarcity of Merlijn. Wrong? Like, no?
No, it's just funny hearing the lies of Deborah.
Sorry, that was not the message.
I'm alienated from that comment, but no, go ahead. You're trying to cause trouble right from the start. So let's go.
I want to see the blood, the fight magic. And I think that somehow each of you guys started, you started with something negative, but then you went to something positive, and I just wanted to comment on that, because I think it's a very interesting way of thinking, instead of doing the reverse. And of course, this is a call to action, because that is also the core of SDGs and also the core of the climate crisis. So it must be a sort of a call. But I just wanted to reflect on this. Yeah.
Perhaps I could argue.
Please.
Yes. I don't think that we started out with negative. In fact, I would argue that we didn't, because I think to decommodify growth is a positive statement. I mean, at the end of the day, if we are on this hyper-consumerism that 2020 threw us off of, thankfully, but in many ways I know it's problematic as well. That to me is one of the most beautiful things. It's a beautiful sentence of great positivity to say decommodify growth, because there is a finite resource, in that way. I would submit that starting with work is not based on scarcity is another positive comment, because it's a declaration of truth. And a mindset based on scarcity is almost incapable of seeing the abundance of the simple, that's often considered naive joy. Like this moment right here, right now is a moment of joy, that we're here together, thank God, knock on wood, healthy, everyone. And so I would even argue that the way we see negative and positive is something to rethink. I know at Creative Revolution we talk about effective and ineffective. Mm-hmm. I know at Find Out Why I talk about honoring contrasts and that which is wanted and that which is unwanted. And I think negative and positive, certainly coming from the United States, this cult of positivity has not served the world. Yeah. And so therefore I would just argue that framing these beautiful statements about the need to change should be considered effective.
Yeah.
Effective, and there, I guess we would frame it as positive. Right?
Point taken. Point taken.
Yeah.
At the same time, these are all calls for action,
Yeah.
right? And in response kind of to the toxic positivity that we see in the US, there's of course the toxic negativity of the critical school, and that is a critique that is often levied against critical philosophers is you have a lot to say about what's going wrong, but what about doing something about it? And this is where I think critical pedagogy bridges that gap in that it is a call to action. It's not sufficient to just notice and say that we have a problem with the system as it is, but that is a call to commit to a fight to change the system. We cannot passively observe, arms crossed, drawing notes about the system, and not at the same time be called in the fight to change that system. It's an act of bad faith to just say, well, this is not my fight, I'm just here to analyze it.
Would you like to say something about critical pedagogies, maybe? With Freyer?
Yeah, so critical pedagogies are pedagogies that recognize the interplay between the agency of individual humans and oppressive structural forces.
Mm-hmm.
So critical scholars
With forces, you mean system?
Critical scholars look at oppressive, but that has real life consequences. And this is why I consider myself an engaged academic, engaged feminism in the actual practice of empowering girls, in the actual practices of environmental activism, because that is what critical pedagogy calls on us to do, and to do that with our students.
I think an interesting point that you, Deborah, raised, which is, of course, the elephant in every room right now, which forces us to keep our distance, is the pandemic. And I think you introduced it as something that maybe not per se created these criticalities, but at least exposed them. However, I think for all of you, you've been active in your research work, entrepreneurial activities before that. So I think it would be, you could see, of course, I think the pandemic as indeed like this great shifter, and I think maybe at the beginning of it we were all, let's say I was somehow hoping of something, right? There is some kind of a window of there. I think this kind of feeling is shared. However, it's a window that's not gonna change itself, so to say.
Just recently, like an hour ago, there was like a news item of the estimation of the CO2 emissions, which will be higher.
I saw, it's not good.
It's like the second highest ever, because everyone wants to make repair last year the damage of by pumping up the electricity
it's cold,
extra.
Right? It's cold that's causing this.
The cold, the electricity producing thing. So that's really it's a
but then it
thing.
really speaks about the mindset. People maybe also. I'm including myself in people. I don't want to be people, because then it also doesn't help. I think.
Well, I guess you are.
I am, it's true. You feel that maybe you're being stuck for 1 year, so then you need to kind of catch up. You need to do more. You need to, but maybe I'm drifting.
Well, there is the whole notion of abundance. I noted all around me like a year ago, people appreciated, for example, nature. Because if you cannot go to theater or shopping or any distraction, you're just walking outside, and then you see it's actually beautiful here, and there is a lot to celebrate or a lot to enjoy. You don't need to pay for it, it's there, it's for you, it's a gift. So that for me was full of hope, because I think this key, can you see beauty, can you see nature, that gives me hope.
You think that will stay?
Well, of course the whole machinery to distract us is very big, it's very powerful. We can call it, just commercials or reclame, That's a big machinery who wants us to feel that we lack something, that we are missing something. need to buy something to repair something that we're not complete ourselves. And that is, well, indeed, we have been brainwashed by it. And I feel nature can tell us a bit of the opposite. And also beauty. I mean, you mentioned alienation and the whole like broken connections that we can see as really typical of our world. Specialization, but also all these extreme ways how people box things up. And how we also disconnect from where our food is produced, where our clothing are made, you know, the whole global system, to repair some of these broken connections. I feel beauty is essential there. And that's also why if we talk about activism, or if you have to be outspoken or whatever, as soon as you start to blame others, well, I feel it's necessary, but also it's very hard to keep the connections. Yeah. If people start defending themselves and there is all kind of friction. So that's a big question in my, well, that I'm currently bothering with. How do we combine sometimes really strong action, really force, and also see that we seek to repair, to connect, to bring people together.
I think it's interesting that you bring up that point, given you're a conductor and a composer, because I would submit that you could transfer the template of how do you make it harmonize at a level that someone that can compose can do that. So I would sort of defer that in terms of you'll find solutions to your questions in that sort of frame. But another thing that I was thinking about is young people, and the idea that when we say we or they or so on, and for example, we are hyper consumers, we are brainwashed, etc., is that I think there is a big divide with youth at this point with the digital technology perspective of the borderless world. And I'm very invigorated by the fact that I would submit we need reverse mentors, you know, that young people are, when I think of the UBI, you know, Universal Basic Income, I think of the UBDI. You know, Dana Budson does this work on UBDI, that we should be remunerated for our Google searches or our whatever searches, you know, that we should not be providing this data for free. It's something that we think about it, find out why as well. You know, unpaid labor. I'm a mother. I raised 2 sons. I did it without babysitters, and I did unpaid labor for almost 2 decades. And, you know, in New York City, it's in some ways it was difficult. In other ways, it was quite easy because I had New York City at my fingertips. I was thinking about your music, and I was thinking about how many outdoor free concerts, because it is one of the places in the world where you come for public open space as an artist. You know, and I was thinking about the idea of empowering women and young women, like the work that you do, from the idea of the UN being based in New York and being based in The Hague, being based in parts of Europe. We're here, and who is they and who are we? It's getting more and more layered. And I think that bringing youth into this conversation is something that we should do next time, or I'd recommend it. Yeah. Because I think a 16-year-old would have a different perspective. Not all 16-year-olds, of course, are qualified a million times, but they have an approach to limitless very much like everyone in this room when we were 15 and 16. We had a sense of limitless and limit that we broke through because of our belief in ourselves, or we wouldn't all be sitting here. Yeah. You know, because we can look at each other and describe each other, but each one of us defines ourselves, right? And we don't know what we've all been through. We don't know what we've all seen, but that's the beauty of young people, and I think we need their energy in this conversation.
Well, talking about work, because young people are confronted a lot with the fact that, well, the whole school system will tell them, like, this is needed for work, this is needed for society, this is what people will expect from you to deliver, to be capable of, or etc. So to actually be very sensitive and see that these limited possibilities that you feel. I mean, if I think when I was 15, my God, all the possibilities, it was so great. And imagine you start traveling, and I think I started hitchhiking when I was 17 or so, like that feeling that you can just go at the road and with no money, a few days later you're at the other side of Europe. That feeling, that's also life.
Yeah.
You can hitchhike through life. That's the abundance, because there are cars, there are people, they are happy. You pay with your conversation, and people love it because that is a beautiful currency. It's about connection, it's very valuable. So to see that, to explore that, there is a big question: can we encourage people on that road? Instead of, there is the bombardment that you have with also that we put pressure on young people. Say like, you must achieve, you must, and so on. It's crazy, And my kids are now 8 and 10 years old, so I see that already it's starting about which high school can you be,
the right one.
Possible for you. I mean, and if you hit the right one, you're safe, the rest of your life. You're the good side. And if you lose there, it will be going down from here. That's pressure.
Ginie, do you?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I have to really disagree. You could take that possibility of going hitchhiking, etc., because you're white, you're a man, and you live in Europe. As a woman, I would never do that because it wouldn't be safe for me. Even a woman with a black belt, such as myself.
Okay.
A black woman, forget it. A trans person, forget it. Their lives would be in danger doing something like that.
It was a metaphor.
But it is symptomatic of a system in which certain people have infinite possibilities and most of the rest don't. And it's what you were saying about the layers. The layers are definitely there, and we need to recognize them if we want to make progress. It's true. I've been doing work with kids in VMBOs. They don't have infinite possibilities open to them. Their dad was a truck driver, their mum is a beautician. They have no idea what university even means.
No. Well, exactly. I totally, you have a good point. What I started to do is to work, on music with people in Gaza, for example, in Syria, in refugee camps, to actually really try to learn if you are living in scarcity, if you lost everything, or if there's a big pressure on you, where can you find space to breathe, space, and how can you create, let's say, forms of mental safety that you can really feel like, this is me, this is myself, I can trust few things, because there's a lot they cannot trust in their environment, and I've seen there the power of art, because it is in that sense a free space, which also makes it safe. When I was working in Syria before the revolution, before the civil war, with music people could celebrate freedom. They would never call it freedom concert, but it was all about freedom. And I've seen some people from the West who just traveled there and started discussions about politics to see people will close down because they know it's very dangerous, and that is very, it's very damaging with let's say, a European mindset to go to the Syria of 2009 and start talking about freedom. No, in poetry, in music, in visual arts, there was the space. There's the freedom, and there also lays maybe the abundance, the possibilities. So it's really a challenge and an art to see, the metaphorical hitchhiking, what kind of hitchhiking is possible maybe, even if you live in a very, in a challenging situation, yeah.
But it also does require a base layer of physical safety, not just mental safety, but when we deal with, I deal particularly with the young women, but when we deal with the young women of colour whose physical safety is compromised on a daily basis by poverty, by patriarchy, it takes a lot of work and a lot of time to be able to build those spaces and to commit to creating that physical safety that then allows the mental safety, which is also why we have this focus on the bodily safety, martial arts, self-defense, self-protection, as the first layer before we say, here, scholarship to go do your education, write poetry. Many of our young girls are talented artists and poets, but they only find the space to do that once they have been in our programs developing their physical capability and safety in this world, it's something that, I'm sorry to say, but men take it so much for granted,
Yeah.
this physical safety. As a woman, you live day in, day out, at work, as in your personal life, in a place where you're constantly aware, is there a danger here? And this affects all women, but particularly badly trans women and women of color, and we have to recognize that.
I don't know if this will, I want to add this, one there's something you couldn't know just by looking at me, but I hitchhiked when I was 23. I left New York, I was a clothing designer, assistant, sold everything and came to Europe back in the 80s, because I'm born in the 60s. And when I moved to New York in 1982, it was one of the worst, most crime-ridden times. Right, and so my personal agency, my safety was something that had to be inside my awareness and in my body. And when I was young and traveled through Europe hitchhiking, I also was a Servas guest, SERVAS. It's affiliated with the UN, and it's promoting peace one person at a time, staying in homes. You know, I didn't know people, and I would stay in their homes. But the reason I bring that up is that I agree with what both of you are saying completely, and then I add also this nuance of this idea of an existing limitation that I also try to bust through and think about, okay, so if it's so, and I am a woman, and I know that I'm at risk if I leave at certain times by myself, and et cetera. And that's why I say grounded in fact, start with the facts and ground it in reality, and why I'm super interested in hearing in the question of work, the idea of work and education as work. Because I think I'm an entrepreneur, but I think what both of you, and I'm an entrepreneur in the education field as well as peace building. And when you think of peace building, it's not peacekeeping, which is take the guns. It's not peacemaking, which is draw the borders. It's peace building, which is create the environments where people thrive. And I think that I would love to hear you speak about education even more vis-a-vis work and how we rethink it. Because I thought you were going to say to Merlijn that parents have to be the ones that stop pressuring the kids, because the system won't. The system hasn't been changed yet. Parents have to change the system and break the structure. We have to demand, everyone needs electricity. So of course, coal use, because that's our way of getting electricity at the moment, is going up. We need to demand that stop, that solar and that wind and that all the other ways that are sustainable can give us our electrical grids, because we're going to be using electricity more and more, as time goes on. I'm super interested in your ideas of education in the experiential space. And because I know you both talk about space, my kids went to a school called the Calhoun School in New York City, which is a progressive school. They also went to public high schools, which are completely different than the private space, right? So I've seen private and public. But what I've noticed in hands-on experiential learning, that's where change happens. And which I'm sort of monologuing now, and I'll stop, but in this monologue position, change doesn't happen because you just tune out. Hopefully your listeners haven't tuned out already, but I would understand it if they did. But it's that experiential, that sort of hands-on that you both do that is extremely interesting to me.
Yeah, I hear what you say about the parents. My experience from working with disadvantaged groups is not all parents have the means to do that. But I see a powerful alliance of teachers, progressive teachers and students forming in universities, and that can, of course, trickle down to the high schools as well. A powerful alliance of students and progressive teachers who can open up these spaces to challenge the way that education is done, what it demands of us in terms of quantities, quantifiable things. It is hard because the world demands numbers. it demands grades. And what I discuss with my students is they have this kind of slot machine effect. So when I try and run a course that doesn't have grades, but that is all based on this like lived, felt experience, it's only allowed to be an extracurricular program because if there's no grades, then we can't give credits for that. And two, the students, it felt to me, what they were describing and going through my course was like an addict trying to come off cold turkey. They were not comfortable the first month. They were like, where are my grades? How do I know that I'm doing okay? Well, I'm telling you how you're doing.
Not enough.
And education has become this this highly addictive kind of, for those that are good at it, it's like put the assignment in, get the grade out. And for those who are not good at it, it is terrible. The interviews that I did with the VMBO students where they were telling me...
What is I mean, I know what it is.
VMBO, it's
vocational school, maybe.
So when you're 12 in Holland, they decide your future, basically. And it's largely based on the class of your parents. And you can't really change. So once you're on the VMBO track, it is nigh impossible to get back, because you'd have to finish the VMBO, then go on to the HAVO, and then to the VWO before you go to university, which adds extra years and extra costs onto your education. So it's completely messed up. There was an excellent documentary made up recently about this called Klassen, that described how class reproduction happens in Dutch schools, and it's supremely depressing. But what I found supremely depressing is young girls, 15, telling me, I'm just too stupid to go to university. And I'm like, how? You are clearly not stupid, you are clearly talented, but the system decided at 12 that because a lot of these kids, their parents went through divorces round about the time of the CITO-toets. So they're going through, a lot of these kids are from immigrant backgrounds, so they immigrate a couple of years before the CITO-toets, and that CITO-toets, that one moment, determines the rest of their life. And then it doesn't matter what pedagogies you put in place, because the system has decided. And that's why we, progressive teachers, also have to commit to fight at the level of the ministry, to fight. And that's what I love about Razel, because it takes the fight to the ministry and says, we need to change how we do education. You can't have that boundary between university and hogeschool anymore. And those are the fights that we can be putting up.
And this is interesting because I totally agree. There is the whole thing, it's in the ginie. I mean, we can talk about individuals doing needing to change or whatever. But Ginie, you have also the projects that are really focused on the individual, like the self-defense. So you know it's the system, but on the individual, you also see that the key is really there. And that's
not an individual sport, though. I think it's a misconception. It's a misconception that a lot of people have about martial arts. One, that it's about fighting, and two, that it's an individual sport. But actually Budo, which is the fundamental ethic of martial arts, is a collective philosophy. It's the harmony, literally in Japanese, it's the harmony that exists within the martial arts community. And what we tried to build was a safe community for these girls. And it's a kind of, martial arts is a family that you build. So in no way is it considered an individual practice. And that's something that we really try and challenge. It's also a worldwide family, and that's what allowed us to break past cultural barriers in India and in Zimbabwe. It's like, you have a black belt, I have a black belt, so we have an understanding.
But Merlijn, I think what you're getting at too is, and I think it speaks to what both of you are saying, is that human-created systems, we say at the Creative Revolution, human-created systems can be changed by human beings, and that's where the path or the intersection of the individual in the collective, right? Because if we're safe in the collective, then our individuality becomes a member of a collective, and if we're not safe, then we're enslaved or we're entrapped, and our creativity is probably almost snuffed out, you know? And so I was wondering about, I don't mean to take over the questions, but the impact of mindset change. Because I know from myself as an entrepreneur, when I was a clothing designer, I mean, the reason I became a clothing designer is because when I would work in shops when I was young, and plus I loved drawing, and see that an outfit could change the way we feel, you know, and not to deny that or to belittle the fact that our clothing does have an impact, you know, and to celebrate that it did is why I became a clothing designer and then did that for a long time. But this creativity, this is what interests me, and this is what I think is in abundance also, because I know that working with survivors of torture in Bellevue, New York, you know, you can't kill creativity. It's very hard to kill creativity. And that spark, you know, is there. And I think that's another way, you know, to your question, an answer to your question about how should we think about it, is creativity is an individual thing that is a spark that is very hard to kill. So how do we activate that spark of creativity in each person and then gather our collective, you know, power?
So based on this, you think that creativity is not really happening? Because if you are you arguing that creativity is the thing that will actually help the change into the system?
100%.
Okay.
100%. Because it is this, you know, the thing is with a creative mindset, what do creatives do? I mean, I'm speaking for myself as well. You're like an optimist for solutions. And you just keep thinking, if I just change this one thing, we could change this, we could change this. It's that belief in change, you know, and not everybody wants to change. And to your point, Ginie, about, you know, the different class structures and the different layers in class of just trying to put food on the table and keep your kids, you know, safe. That's maybe not the time where you're going, and certainly I can relate to that. I don't have time to express my creativity similarly throughout my whole entire life. And, you know, I've been around for a while now. So, but 100%, creativity is that spark of change, and the belief in it is powerful, and I would submit is the foundation of everything. And we are the creators of these systems, so let's take it to the ministry and let's make some changes.
But I think the idea of letting go of the grades is a nice. It's very concrete, of course, so it speaks to the imagination. Also for me as a student, but then just if we accept the hypothesis that education would be better off without grades, or could have a better grading system at least, you know. But maybe let's just say, let's get rid of grades and find a new structure. Then still
a guaranteed basic graduation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for education at least. But perhaps so let's say we kind of make some consensus within Erasmus University College or an institution that would work. Then still, you even find that with, as you were saying, with current students, they struggle to deal with or to accept that. They were like, but it used to be that way, and that way is the way I know it. And I think that's perhaps somehow signifies how, even though you have a better idea, that everyone agrees, or maybe not everyone, but a lot of people agree that it's better, it doesn't mean it will happen.
Yeah, in theory it works, but in practice then there is always like some friction.
There is an existing system that will struggle back, if consciously or unconsciously, with these students. I bet they also want better education, right? But still there's this, I think this friction is important if we talk about creating the spaces. It's also okay, but then will the current education maybe be against that, I think.
I think grounding it in either or is always problematic. It's both and. Mm-hmm. And I think I could see it as, you know, I mean, I'm going to be very honest, I'm going to boast actually. When I got my degree in international studies in 2019, I graduated summa cum laude. I loved getting grades. When I was a clothing designer and fashion design student at FIT, I could care less about my grades. So I don't think grades are the enemy. I think it's the obsession with grades, and I think it's the right application of value, you know, because we can rethink how to value, you know, and reward accomplishment. Because I would sit in classes and see the people that cared very much, and I would see myself, and I cared very much, and I really enjoyed being rewarded for caring so much and doing a really good job. But I didn't feel devalued when perhaps I should say that devalued is by my perspective, is a personal choice. I'm not going to be devalued. But but the grades do matter. And I think a hybrid, just like we're all living this hybrid life now, and we busted open the fact that this can be. Let's not just do one or the other.
Well, isn't this a great parallel with the basic income discussion? Because, well, there's a lot of people who predict if there is a universal basic income, everything will collapse and chaos and so on. We need, even a better experience. Someone took care of a few chickens out of this industrial farm and took the chickens in the backyard. For a week, they did not move. They could not, they just never had this concept of space. And then only a few steps later, they started really to behave like the chicken, maybe their Manchester chicken. So that is a very big thing. Also, if we will be confronted with rapid changes, of course, we're programmed in a certain way. So how to start practicing? And we need to start practice today. So where can we start? Do you have a few minutes that you can say like, I don't need to produce, to work or to whatever, to be effective? Mm-hmm. Can you save a few minutes a day? And can you expand it? Can you start with a basic income 1 day a week? Can we claim, let's say, Friday for something that's important for you? And then, of course, can we see also the big differences, the challenges for some people who have really struggled to make ends meet, which is of course, but also let's do it everywhere, not just in privileged areas. People who can celebrate time to do extra study or do whatever. Let's see how we can hack this system, starting very small somewhere.
Do you think, Ginie, that this progressive kind of change will actually, I don't want to say a solution, but do you think it would be something possible? Or
I think we're somewhat out of time. And there's a great French, what is he? He's an engineer by training, but he's like a sustainability economics specialist, Jean-Marc Jancovici. And he says the change will happen with or without us. With us is a lot better because of the finite nature of the planetary resources and what we're doing to them. The change will be rapid and as brutal as we've experienced the pandemic. It's nothing compared to what we're about to face. And what I saw firsthand in the last 4 years is the collapse of Zimbabwe. So I've seen how a country can go to functioning relatively okay to total collapse in 4 years. And that frightens me because I see no reason why this would not happen here. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't happen. And so the time for incremental change was 50 years ago. And that is the infinite possibilities you were talking about. I recognize them from my rather privileged, middle-class youth. I think the students who are going through the doors of university today are somehow aware that they don't have the future that our parents were promised, that I was promised as a kid. It's now, by the way, we're likely to cross 1.5 degrees of warming in the next 5 years.
And they're asked to solve the problem as well. And the problem is foisted upon them as if they're the ones that have to solve the problem.
Okay, so start 50 years ago, well, that's hard. But start today, that's something. And I also, I'm just searching for my role here, personal, like what can I...
Exactly. What can we do tomorrow, basically?
Well,
to still... To still be... we don't want to kind of like just kill ourselves. The point is also to contribute to this. Because already, if there are people that are listening, already people that are here talking about it, means already that there is intention to do something, which is not, we don't have to take that for granted, because unfortunately there are people that are still not even at this table. But
there's a beautiful saying, like someone saying like, well, I have advice, let's practice meditation. Just do it like 20 minutes every day. But if you're very busy, then start with 1 hour. It's very good for me to keep this in mind. Like if you want rapid change, you need also really to go to fundamentals, to really go deep, you know? To go deep, you also have to really start digging. And another about meditation, because that's really a challenge, you know? A lot of people know it's very beneficial and it's also very hard. So there is an example of someone who said, like, I want to meditate 1 hour a day, and I want to start tomorrow. And the teacher says, okay, great. Are you really committed? Yes, I'm very committed. You can only meditate 1 minute. And the person was very frustrated. No, I'm really committed, you know. Okay, 1 minute for the whole month. And after 1 month, you can do 2 minutes now. But never skip one. You have never a good excuse to skip 1 minute, you know. You can never say, I was too busy for 1 minute. And after, well, let's say a year, the person had a practice of an hour because it was minute by minute by minute. And it was really part of a practice, a fundament. So that is maybe a challenge, like where can we really start making fundamental changes? And they will be maybe invisible first, like the first weeks of a seed or the first days of a seed. Not much is happening there. And then, but water it and let the sun shine, and then suddenly, the growth can go rapid.
Too positive, Ginie?
One of my best examples for a person who has, I think she has single-handedly prevented maybe 0.2 degrees of global warming, and that's Stacey Abrams. Because it is the vote in Georgia for those two senators to flip the Congress over to the Democrats has changed the course of history. And it is a profound indictment of the state of the world that Georgia should decide the fate of climate change and the human race. But there it is. But she picked a problem that she could do something about, which was voter disenfranchisement in Georgia. And that, how much did that pay off for the rest of the world? She picked one problem and she went like, that problem? That's my problem. I'm going to, and it serves as a model for then organizing voter rights all across the US, and then we can learn from it here in Europe too. And the thing is, we do live in an age where change can happen massively. Once it gets going past this threshold, once we pass that tipping point, we can massively learn from each other and everywhere, and spread that much more rapidly than we have in the past. But we are out of time. You know, we are out of time. It's not 8.5 years, it's 1.5 degrees is already just write it off, it's done. Can we keep the planet below 2 degrees of warming? Debatable. At 3, we start to have a really, really big problem in that we don't know if we can stop it once it gets to 3. So, and we're talking about this within our lifetime.
I think to go existential on this and hopefully not be too reductive, it's that we have now. We're out of time. We've been out of time. You know, I've certainly grew up in the nuclear era. And we are out of time, but we also have time, which is such a paradox, you know, because we do have right now. If anyone here, hopefully not, has been faced with cancer and thought that, you know, might not live longer, that does sort of distill your thinking about time. And certainly I've had that, I mean, I have had that experience, and thank God I'm all right. But you know, time, space, you speak about time, we're all talking about time and space, and we're here in time and space. And, you know, the past, the present, and the future happen in that 1 second. And I would submit that the out of timeness, on the one hand, is not to negate the present moment on the other hand. And in the present moment, yes, we can meditate. We can meditate by breathing in 3 times. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, you know, and celebrate life as I breathe in, and, you know, release of toxicities when I breathe out. And I think this radical self-care, when I heard it was described as radical, I thought, to whom is care radical? You know, only to the other? Because to me, radical self-care is the chance that I get to keep living. And so I'm super committed. I like something you said in your TED Talk, Ginie, about the commitment making a commitment to change. And I think hopefully your listeners, and I think all of us here, we're living lives of a commitment to change. And, I read once when I was younger, change is something we all fear, but something we all need. And I think what's fantastic about creativity and education and creativity itself is that is the embodiment of change. And the last thing I'll say on the idea of connecting your mind to your body and your body to your mind and your ears to your body to your mind through music and so on with your heart is love is the greatest of these, and radical self-care is an act of love for each other. And I think that we can do that starting right now. I would submit that because of Eric and Marco's program just now, that's what we're doing. And I certainly feel it in this moment. And that emboldens me to go out and speak up and continue to speak up. So I think we start with now.
I think it's excellent that you bring up an existential perspective, not just because I am myself a scholar of existentialism, but because it's a lived philosophy, right? I'm a great admirer of the French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir, and the fact that she, and it's not surprising to me that it was the woman of the lot who figured out that you cannot have existentialism by yourself, that existence is a shared space. To be myself, I have to be with others otherwise, and not just with others now, but with others towards an open future. And so long as there are two people left alive on this planet, we have to keep fighting for that open future. That commitment. It's not just nice to have, it's a fundamental condition of our existence as humans. To commit is to live, is to be. And the absence of commitment that capitalism requires of us as passive consumers and disembodied labor, this alienation from our commitment, it's also an alienation from our humanity. Capitalism demands us to abandon what makes us human in order to become commodities. And that we have to fight. And I believe the fight is in schools and in universities.
Well, I also see a connection between 5 minutes ago, like to say, like, where can we put, let's say, save some space or save time and claim it for something totally different, like the example of meditation, which is totally different, opposed actually to our daily behavior. Also in the economy, I mean, the last, let's say, few decades, everything got monetized. I mean, child care is, of course, something that it had to be discovered as something that you can monetize. And there is a lot of things in the gig economy that just people are designing companies like, can we monetize something that everyone else forgot to monetize? Can we squeeze some productivity out of anything, you know? I have been in this type of brainstorms, like innovation. Let's see how we can have people, where do people have a few minutes left when they when they wait for the train? A few minutes. Let's see what we can extract there. Well, this whole mindset, if we can start reclaiming and demonetizing areas step by step, but also really celebrate, like say no one can bring this again to Wall Street or can pay for it anymore. These are areas, safe spaces where there is no money involved. Well, it's just an imagination, but what would happen if we really claim this and see it as a victory to reclaim relationships, especially recognition. The word was also very important, I think. Recognition, can we take it back from that it needs to be by money, valued by money. Some things we cannot value. And that's a whole project. And there is a lot going on in the space of commoning, which is of course, that also makes me hopeful.
I think we should add too the idea of money and the idea of value can be on the one hand, on the other hand. And I think that the idea of consumerism and nuance and capitalism, I'm not an anti-capitalist, although I certainly am an anti-consumerist. And I feel that toxic capitalism and hyper-capitalism, because I mean, if we're going into the hardcore academic definition of what capitalism is and extracting and exploiting and et cetera, then yes, I think that it's very problematic. But the idea of a market and the idea of services, goods and services that we can create for each other and exchange, you know, the idea of an exchange is something I think is valuable. I don't want to, you know, go wash my clothes down at the river. I would love to have a machine in which I can do it, and that's a product of capitalism in a way, and that's a very reductive way of describing it. But what I do, and having been a designer in the global pipeline, right, I think it's the exploitation of human being and the not fair fight is the problem. And I think that the consumerism gone wild is a problem, because that's where infinite growth is the myth, as opposed to a sustainable, regenerative expansion versus growth. Alex Edmonds wrote the book, Grow the Pie, and talks about systematically changing our approach to how we look at capitalism as a growth model and think of it as an expansion of value. I think there is something, I'm adding that to the table just because the fight is starting. We're in the fight, and let's keep going. And if we can't change everything, let's change what we can change next. And Mother Earth she won't miss us. We'll miss her. I mean, you know, Mother Earth's in charge. At the end of the day, if we don't get this right, we're the ones that are going.
Change is going to happen.
Change is going to happen anyway.
I do think, I feel like also with myself, when you talk about capitalism and degrowth, like I think that's definitely something worth addressing. However, we are kind of running out of time. Yeah. So I do think I want to bring it back a little bit to education, because also we are, of course, with Razzle here. So, and I think the audience is also connected to that somehow. So I was thinking, we've talked about creating spaces. I mean, and I think academia is a space, at least. So I was wondering also, as a lot of us have been students, are students, have been teachers, are teachers. What kind of space could, how can we, what are the biggest shifts we have to make as a student in a classroom? What should we demand tomorrow from our lecturers? And also as teachers, how, because you are not just you're beyond an education expert, you are also a teacher. You are, Ginie, you are making or developing courses. And I think this process, if you could shed some light on how you are trying to put your the pitch that you just gave also into practice in courses. What kind of
practical
how can we make
outcome.
that space that I think we're all already in a little bit somehow, or at some times, how can we make that space maybe more open to transdisciplinarity, for instance, what do we teach to indeed decommodify work or education as a way to imprint that in our heads?
That was such a long...
That's a long and complicated question.
Yes, very brief and great answer, please.
So you want to know how I, concretely, when I develop courses, how I build this philosophy into a concrete course setup. It depends on the course, and it depends what I'm trying to do. So I will not have the same pitch when I'm teaching the climate crisis, for instance, as when I'm teaching experimental pedagogics, as when I'm teaching political economy. So I don't think there's one method that fits every course, and there isn't one method that fits every public or every student group that you have. What I strive to do is to look at, in terms of the students that I have, how do I open up the student's mind and the space that they're in and the space that we're in? How do I open that up to conversations that can be transformational? So, and how do we get those conversations to then move in the student's mind from mere academic knowledge to real world action and change. So these are very much pedagogies that where I try to get students to think about the world they live in and about the world they could live in and the world they might live in and don't want to live in. So I do think, and I agree with you, that we shouldn't demonize grades. I do think there is some value in assessment. Assessment steers the learning in some way. It's just a slot machine effect that I'm against. But to design assessments that point students towards an action-oriented in the world, being in the world as they learn. So I do a lot of project work, for instance, where students have to research real-life problems and then design real-life solutions, but incorporated with a critical academic analysis. It's a method called problem-based learning, problem-oriented project work. And it's problem-based learning can be used as a critical pedagogy tool, but it is mostly used as a marketing gimmick. And I say this as one of the world's experts on PBL. I have been disenchanted with the way in which it has been marketized and used as a tool to develop 21st century skills, i.e. increased commodification of labor and work. I do use PBL in a critical way in my course, particularly the climate crisis, but also political economy. And that has to do with the framing of the problems, where we open that up to particularly different lenses. We have Black ecology, Indigenous ecology on the curriculum. We have interdisciplinary approaches, philosophy, art, psychology, sociology, political economy, all included within an 8-week course. And that requires a team of teachers that is open to these perspectives, that comes from this interdisciplinary space. So in practice, my tip, if you want to start teaching critical decolonial pedagogy now and you don't know where to start, the first thing is team up with people who want to do that as well. It's hard to do by yourself, so team up with people who can bring in these insights. The second thing is be aware of the lenses and the spaces around these problems that you want to tackle. What have people of color written about this? What have women written about this? What have people in working class written about this? That opens up your spaces. So educate yourself first before you try and educate the students. And this is, I come from a super conservative right-wing family. Like my values were Christian, Catholic, conservatism growing up. And it's through my own education that my eyes were opened to wow, maybe I need to question some of the fundamental values that I was brought up with. So as teachers, we also have to educate ourselves constantly. That's a commitment that we make to ourselves and to our students and to society, to keep educating ourselves. And it's okay to change your mind and to realize that you were wrong about something. And the final point is, it's okay if it doesn't work out the first time around. You can try things and sometimes it won't work out. And to my students, I would say, we teachers are also human. I know it's hard. Students do, when we do all this work, students do tend to see us as kind of unreal creatures, but we are also human and we also make mistakes. We also say stupid things sometimes. I have a 4-year-old at home. I'm exhausted all the time. So, especially with the lockdown, I did my last few lectures with my kid on my lap. I was just I give up, right? Enough already. And to accept that students are human and teachers are human, and this is a human project that we're building, I think that will help us go a long way.
To you? No?
Well, I think back of this the notion of abundance as something that actually might be scary for people. It's easy for me to say it. Let's get rid of scarcity and embrace abundance. And maybe there is a connection with going on the sea in a sailing boat. You have abundance of possibility. You know, you can go everywhere, but it can also be very scary. You don't see anything on the horizon. You know, your target, your goal is beyond the horizon. So for our future, we need some scientific instruments, like a sailor has all these ways to compass, yes, and other ways, the weather report. But that's not enough. And you can also not rely of just looking back what was the route of the sailor or my own route a week before. You really know that there is currents, there is winds, things are changing all the time. And I believe the next years, next decades will be like that, full of change, like a fluid landscape. But then you need really to be present and have a very good perception, be very open, and of course your experience to really read the waves, navigate your way. That I think as a student, if you learn to navigate, then you can also let go of maybe all the structures that, the grades, and that also can really translate to a working life where you don't let society tell you what to do, but you can really navigate, you can really react on the forces that are there, urgent things, beautiful things, meaningful things. Yeah, it's all there, you know, and
So
it's the art of navigation.
Before we run out of time, I want to add my part on the education thing. So agree with you completely on navigation. I think that the inner compass is one of the best guides if it's cultivated. You know, we have our inner compass. The holistic teaming, I think, that you're talking about is makes it more interesting. Diversity, you know, variety is the spice of life, and this idea of cross teaching with teams makes all the difference. But I think the four-letter word that I keep thinking about, you know, it is love, but the one in this case is care, C-A-R-E. And I think that when I think of all of us who've been through education systems, even the really bullshit ones, to round that back up, we do remember the teachers that cared about us. We all do. I mean, and so it's connect to the teachers that care, and then teachers connect to the students that care, and that's where the magic is. And there is no sure thing, there is no guarantee, but one thing we know when someone cares, and we know when we care. So that's what I would say, and I think that this is a demonstration of that.
Great. I think this is an amazing point where we are now. We have to round up. I think what we wanted to do is have like a small moment together of reflection. We've talked about meditation before and how important it is to even take 1 minute to let things sit in your mind, because I think we've heard a lot of ideas, which is great, but it's also important, we think, to have a brief moment to not be talking or be listening, but to reflect. So also for the people who are joining us live, we would like to recommend to take a brief moment. I think 1 minute.
Yeah.
It's a good start.
Okay,
I heard.
it's a good start. Okay.
So I don't know. Maybe we take a moment. If you want, you can close your eyes. Try to focus on your breath and think about what you heard, what resonated with you, what maybe was confronting, what challenged your beliefs, what enhanced your beliefs. Try to think about what was said that made you feel strongly about something. If you were a good listener, if you were a good talker. Think about what worked, what didn't work, and also about what are you going to take with you from this? What are you going to carry? All right. Thank you all very much. We hope this moment worked for
Oh yeah.
you.
Sure.
Thanks. We're on a journey to discover these kind of spaces, how we can best, make it something more than a conversation as well. Continuing with that idea, this is also has been a live stream. It's also been recorded. Surprise. But just to the point that we also want to continue this conversation, and of course, we would have loved to have this room full of people who would be contributing as well. However, to kind of see if we can recreate that, nevertheless, we will open up a phone number where people can send messages to, preferably audio messages, because we actually want to edit this conversation into a podcast episode. And the podcast episode we actually see as a way to then include those contributions from anyone who wants.
Nice.
The phone number, I'm going to say it now. You can also just find it
On Instagram.
on Instagram
Everywhere.
or anywhere. It's 0682138003. The deadline for this is the 30th of April, because we do want to kind of keep the momentum. And so, it's basically a question to anyone who was part of this conversation. This conversation is also going to be on YouTube for that time, so people can rewatch it. It can be a question that you have. It can be a contribution. It can be a personal experience. You can be an expert yourself. You can be not an expert yourself. Both possible.
I just want to thank you guys. Thank you for being here. It was lovely.
Yeah,
it
thanks
was
a
really,
lot.
really nice.
Too. Yeah.
Did you enjoy that?
Yeah.
Thanks for organizing.
Nice.
Yeah, it was lovely.
And thank you also to the team behind, to Mirte, to Monse, to Ben, to Noemi, to Niels, to Eric.
Thank you too. Thank you, Willem de Koning, for having us.
Yeah.
And we're excited to work on this project, furthermore improve.
And to change the world.
Also,
No?
along the way.
I mean, no.
Yes.
Let's,
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so
very
much.
Yo, bye.
Yeah.
Bye.